Okay, so here's the thing. I've never really had very many friends. And don't get me wrong, there have been some gems along the way, but for the most part, a lot of my life has just been me chameleoning into my environment to fit in. I've never really quite been sure, who I'm supposed to be, and so it's always felt easier to just be somebody that everybody liked. Because there's this safety in being a part of the collective, or in my case, continuing on the path that everyone had already praised for me. I'm doing well in school and I'm gonna be pre-med. Always seeking affirmation and praise. And I really thought that I had a vast community of people who cared about me. But really, I had just amassed a great number of expectations for myself. I wanted to make everybody happy, and obviously I couldn't. Right after graduating high school, I had a surgery with a 3-month-long recovery, and I was not very interesting during those 3 months, to say the least. That was kind of the first purge, in a sense, the first shed, where I started to see how fraudulent the facades were that I had built. All of the lies were falling apart, and when you're physically immobilized, you kind of have a lot of time to think. Because after spending as long as I could remember surrounding myself with people all the time so that I didn't have to face the truth that when I was alone, I felt really deeply about things that other people didn't feel. I felt so strongly convicted for a lot of things that just didn't seem to matter to anybody else, and because I was so concerned about what other people thought about me and whether or not my values aligned with theirs, I feel like I really shoved down a lot of my own truths because they weren't relatable, and for a while, relatability felt like absolute survival. The other thing too is I feel like everybody has some sort of preset narrative in their life to some degree, and I always felt like I had to figure out how to fit my passions into a career or first into a degree, and I think that was one of the first stifling points because first of all, hello, we're literally children and everything is fluid. We're just figuring it out and that's fine. And second of all, why on earth should we have to take these intense, passionate, fiery drives that we're born with and figure out how to fit them into a degree or a career or whatever cultural understanding of your passion that they're trying to force on you? But coming to terms with these truths is really scary, to be honest, especially by yourself. Because I don't think that we were made to live without communities or some kind of relationship and love. But here's the thing, right? I'd always been looking for somebody to tell me who I was and to tell me that I was good, too. But honestly, I had never really been very good at illuminating other people and seeing the God in them. I was just so desperate for them to reflect some fraction of my identity back to me that I feel like I missed out on a lot of lessons that people had to offer me because I was so absorbed in finding my own identity. I read this book during my first year of college called How to Know a Person, and it really changed the way that I started to approach my relationships. When I arrived in the forest, I didn't try to establish myself as much. I knew that I didn't know who I was and that I was there to kind of figure it out. And I entered this space with a lot of questions. Everyone I met was subject to a lot of questions. I wanted to know what made them tick and what made them feel alive. I became less concerned with my role in the ecosystem, in a sense, with how I was supposed to be a part of the scene, and just kind of turned myself into an illuminator for a little while. Or at least that's what he calls it in the book, because I feel like so many of my conversations and interactions before had been really focused on trying to establish to somebody else how I felt and what I thought, and seeking approval from other people for the parts of myself that even I couldn't bring myself to love. It felt like in a room we were all just trying to take up some space, also desperate to be seen, really seen, but in the process we were bulldozing all of each other's chances at really having a moment of intimacy, in a sense, because when we're all so focused on making a point, there's not a hearing ear for anybody's. I think on some level, we all just want to be seen as we are, or seen for what we want to be. And as I became more curious, it felt like all of my interactions were with like divine creatures in a way. I had one wonderful coworker named Bruce who always insisted that any beauty that I saw in him was merely a reflection of something that I saw in myself. And I would smile and nod and say, yes, thank you, Bruce, but really, like, I had never had somebody respond to my observation of them in that way before. And, like, I've taken psychology classes. I know the whole, like, what you see in others is often a reflection of something that, like, you're uncomfortable with in yourself, but I hadn't really considered as much, like, seeing beautiful things and seeing that I am, like, the beautiful things, or I see this beauty in the beautiful things because of my inherent beauty. Honestly, I feel like I'd always been kind of analytical of others, like trying to figure out how they lined up with my ideas and my values, maybe in a way like trying to figure out, again, how I fit in there, but it was always in such a critical and judgmental way, I think because I didn't have a lot of love for myself. But I loved Bruce's way of explaining things because it didn't cause for separation between observer and observed. And I mean, maybe it even took it beyond the first book that I read about illuminating other people. He made it seem like there didn't need to be a separation between loving myself and loving somebody else. And this felt like such good news as a people pleaser too, because I think part of what always made it so difficult for me to put myself first was that I felt like in creating space for myself, I was causing somebody else to be cramped in or lose some of their own space. But I don't know if that's entirely true. Because as I get older, I also feel like I'm accepting more of the responsibility for the fact that I have to set boundaries and I also have to make it known how I want to be loved. And when I do this, I make space for other people to do the same. And it makes it so that I don't have to spend so much of my time guessing what somebody else needs and probably acting out of my own understanding of the situation and really not even what that person would truly want. I've always struggled so much to make my needs known in relationships because for how much I want to make other people comfortable, it sounds like a death sentence to put somebody out for me. I've been really lucky to experience some relationships now, though, that have shown me that the most fruitful love that is worked for. Intentional love. It doesn't always happen on accident. But in living authentically, a lot of other really cool accidents do happen. I'll never forget this one day that I was working up in the tree houses and I was walking over to one of the platforms with some chairs on it and the sun was rising. It was beautiful and one of the guests was sitting on a chair and just kind of watching everything, and I had seen him observing some of the trees and I could tell that he was an observer, like he was really looking at the forest, and I love when people do that. And so I was walking over on one of the bridges and I was about to fire off some, classic customer service, how was your sleep, or whatever crap. He doesn't even want to answer that hello. But as I was walking up, and I'm telling you, these trees talk, y'all, I just felt so compelled to ask him how the trees made him feel. Like, what? And to my surprise, he looked up at me, and he just had the most kind face. And he started to tell me how the redwoods made him feel. And we started talking about how we understood the world to be. I'd been feeling so alone in my outlook on a lot of things. As nice as it is to run away to the forest, it turns out there's actually not a lot of people out there. And even though I had such an incredible community of people, I didn't quite feel fully understood or fully seen for the things that I really, really cared about. And here I was on a treehouse platform with this random man, finally having this moment of oneness. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person in the world who feels this way. And we talked and talked and talked, and I was crying, and all of a sudden they had to go ziplining away, and so we said goodbye. But when he was leaving, he looked at me, and I get chills, even repeating this now on a voice memo. He looked at me and he said, "We are a part of you just as much as you are a part of us." and I knew I wasn't alone. Without a doubt in my mind, that will forever be one of the most impactful interactions I've ever had with anybody, let alone a guest at work, because I think that we really all have God inside of us, and sometimes speaking out of us in those moments where we allow ourselves to just be free and true and authentic and one. Having moments like that is really confusing though, because like it was like mind-boggling in so many ways, and like a lot of the most impactful conversations I've ever had have not been with like my closest friends, but random people and just happenstance conversations. And so that kind of makes me wonder how humans are meant to interact. You know, like I'm observing these ecosystems all the time and how all of these other living things are living and living for one another too. And it just makes me wonder what our role is, especially for one another. And you know what? Maybe that's my problem, is being so concerned with how I'm supposed to play into other people's lives or how they're perceiving me or any of it. Like, the trees don't concern themselves with that. These redwoods are literally the reason that this entire forest is able to survive, because they're producing mist because they need it, right? Like, just by them doing something that they have to do to survive, they're actually creating the perfect environment for others to thrive too. But that wasn't through them adapting to the needs of those others. It was through their own choice to grow truthfully and authentically for what fulfilled their purpose. But that's like the weird, big, scary P word that we keep coming back to, because how is anybody supposed to know their purpose? Especially when you're this young. Like, what the heck are any of us here for? And that's what I don't know. But here's the thing. We're all hyper aware of our personal deficits and our weaknesses and the things that make us uncomfortable or afraid. Now, what if these things are actually indicators of our purpose? I've lived a lot of my life under the understanding that I have anxiety and depression, and there's something wrong with my brain because I can't function in the environment that I was born into. And when I was trying to figure out how to make my, quote, broken brain fit into this world, that was where I felt really, really lost and where I really actually truly felt sick. I hate that I ever felt silly for being overstimulated in environments that are obviously really highly stimulating. Living in the forest for a while, I guess, just made me realize like how freaking weird our world is. And of course I wasn't able to really see that from the inside. But here's the thing, right? The way that we're living like as a species is not normal. And there's a lot of us all of a sudden seemingly who are, quote, mentally ill, right? But what if we're not? What if we're just feeling what we need to feel to get to the places where we can thrive? Before I came here, I was on a college campus in Phoenix, and it was so overwhelming. It made me feel like I was dying, because living in a city and around so many people, like, just literally fried my brain. I don't know how else to put it. All that I knew was that when I went outside, I felt okay. And so when an outdoor career fair rolled around, I was like, okay, let me go check this out. Maybe there'll be something that, I don't know, will give me the opportunity to feel okay. When I arrived, I had like my longboard and backpack and my lab coat and goggles because I was coming from lab. And she was running one of the tables, and I asked her after we talked if I could just leave my stuff under her table so I didn't have to lug it around, because man, there was like archery and stuff. I needed free hands. And so she was like, of course, no problem. And I went around and I talked to every single table at that fair, every single one. And none of them felt like they would fit. I was devastated. There were all of these elements of the culture on my college campus that I was so ready to escape that I could just tell were still present, even in the spaces that I thought would be safe for me. I was so upset. And so I started walking out, and at this point I'm on the verge of tears, and I go to grab my backpack from the table, and this girl, whose name was Emma, she looks at me and she's like, are you okay? Or I think she asked me how the career fair was, and I just broke down in tears. I started sobbing, and I was just like, I hate it here, and I don't fit in, and this isn't right, and I don't know what to do, and none of these places seemed like they were going to be the right fit, and I'm just so upset. And this girl turned out to be the recruiter for Sonoma Zipline Adventures, and she looked at me with my tears running down my face, and she said, "You would be perfect in the Redwoods. You have to apply." And I was like, "What?" And I did. It was so divinely ordained and absolutely unexpected and in the perfect timing. And a few months later, I found this journal entry that I'd written way before, where I was like, how crazy would it really be if I just ran away to the forest to finish my degree in a treehouse? I can't make this stuff up. I can't. It's just divine. Yet, for how supernatural and unreal it all feels, at the same time, it's almost very simple. I'm just finally part of the ecosystem. And here's the thing, none of this is mine. None of this is just because of me. I'm a part of an ecosystem, and we're all playing our role in it. It's incredible. I've been so blessed to meet people, even just for little moments, who have entirely altered the trajectory of my life. And I'm laughing at myself now because when I started recording this, I meant to talk about how it's frustrating to not feel totally understood or seen, but the more that I talk, I guess, the more I'm realizing that as good as it feels to be seen by somebody, it kind of feels like the most beautiful impact that we can have on each other's lives is just living truthfully and authentically. My life has been flipped upside down by other people, but the thing is, I don't have a lot of friends. And I guess, I just always imagined, dream life would include a group of amazing people around me and all of these people who understood the vision and all that. But maybe that's not this season. Maybe this season is still for illuminating other people, because there are still a lot of lessons for me to learn and possibilities beyond my wildest dreams if I just live authentically and trust others. Trust. Because as good as it feels to be fully independent, and as scary as it is to admit the truth that I didn't accomplish everything by myself, duh, of course I didn't. What in nature has? I am so blessed to be a part of an ecosystem, even if it isn't how I thought it would look. It's an ecosystem. And so I think I just need to remember that even in the moments that I feel the least seen or understood, there's something bigger at play. And my relationships are for a greater purpose than just being seen or understood. We are members of an ecosystem interacting to thrive. I am so grateful for your presence here at the end and that we got to interact today. Thank you.